All right, I think we're almost live. Should be loading up now. Hello, hello. All right, how's it going, everybody? Thank you so much for joining us today. Please share the link and hit that like button. This is going to be a really good show. I'm very excited about it. We've got Peter Todd on the line today. Almost live. And I'm going to lower the volume a little bit here. Okay, great. So yeah, we're going to be talking about a lot of things today, but I think all of them are very important topics. We're going to be talking about Bitcoin privacy and fungibility. I think that there's sort of kind of like a, creeping kind of attack on Bitcoin privacy. I want to also talk about this sort of new, as far as I can tell, new way of doing time logs that you've been involved with recently. It's really interesting. And maybe talk about like what that means, what's it good for, and how does it work more or less. But before we get into that, why don't we kind of want to take it a little bit higher level and maybe talk about the sort of the industry right now as a whole. So take it away, Ugly.
Yeah. First of all, hey, Peter, I really thank you for coming on. I really appreciate it. We've got the studio here, and to have a superstar like you, or who I consider a superstar, but we're really honored and privileged to have you on. And thank you for all that you're doing. So the developers don't get the credit that's due, and this is certainly one of the early on Bitcoin developers. I've had before I start too, I normally don't like people with two first names. So I hate people that have two first names because I can never remember which one I'm supposed to use. That's one of the things that comes with getting old. But I've had a thought that's been going through my mind a lot the last week or so, and I wanted to throw it up at you because I know you've taken some strong stands against a lot of the shit coins, exposing security problems and all that. I mean, you've been hated for it. You've been liable for it. It's just incredible. And it's very a sad state of affairs. So my question is, I'm going to read it to you so we stay on point. Do you see any fundamental difference between the mindset of the crypto world and the world of fiat money? Or is the crypto world simply applying the same mistakes in the name of a free market? Because we hear all this, there's innovation, yet as a Bitcoin standard bearer, we realize the only innovation is really Bitcoin. And it seems to me this big mistake is we think we're doing something different of the crypto. And I make a big distinction between the crypto world and the Bitcoin standard world. So do you see that maybe that's the issue, that the crypto world thinks they're innovative when they've just adopted all the bad habits of the last 3 generations?
Well, I mean, I think the thing I would go say is the crypto world certainly is innovating at scams.
So how's that any different from the fiat world? It's just that we're doing it in the name of the free market.
I mean, the way I put it is, it's really hard to go pin down, well, what exactly is the fiat world? What exactly is the crypto world? Because there's, so many different subparts to it. In the so-called fiat world, you could go everywhere from, the sort of socialist types who want to go and just print money forever and never really do the math on it, to the sort of hard economist types who will happily tell you, we want inflation to go tax people's savings. Here's our behavioral models for why this makes sense. To people who, like fiat for kind of technical reasons, if you will, that aren't necessarily even that relevant anymore. They may just be kind of slow there. To, people who don't even think about money. People who their focus is on investment and money is just some, minor thing that doesn't really matter in their world. So, there's that whole spectrum. And I think what we've seen in the crypto world, which I think you're kind of getting at, is more, the reality is you could make a ton of money in the crypto world. Yeah. That's just how it is. And it was hard to make a ton of money doing honest things. So inevitably, a bunch of dishonest people come in and then do what they can to go get money. I mean, it wouldn't be the first new field where this has happened. It's just a particularly low barrier to entry, in a field that's based on software.
Yeah, I've always found it interested in this industry that it's actually a very difficult industry to do business in and be an entrepreneur in. The only businesses that have really made consistent, steady money and that have lasted in general have been exchanges. I'm amazed that there's still wallets like Mycelium and even and some of the older ones that are still around, because I don't know how they've made money. I think Mycelium ended up doing like affiliate marketing for some things, and they added some business models, but really isn't like you're gonna get rich off of it.
Well, and that kind of gets into privacy, where one of the ways that some of these wallets might be making money is selling logs. It wouldn't surprise me if the likes of the IRS had some backhand deals, with some of these crypto wallets to go get data off of that. It's, I don't have proof for sure. Right. Nothing's ever come to light per se, but that's happened in other cases. VPNs as an example are notorious for this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a concern that I have, and I mean, this definitely lets us kind of move on to the privacy topic, which you and I kind of have been talking about a lot as well, Ugly. Which is, I mean, there's a lot of talk about privacy in the Bitcoin space, but the primary reason that it's relevant in a economic system is because of this idea of fungibility. And there's actually like an old school case or something like the 1800s. I'll have to dig it up. But basically, there was a guy, he had a gold bar. The bar was marked with his stamp. He got robbed. The thief ended up taking the gold bar and selling it, and the bar ended up in a bank. The owner of the gold bar found out it was in the bank and sued the bank for the gold bar, right? And this ended up going to, I guess, the equivalent at the time of the Supreme Court or something like that. And the court settled that even though it was originally his bar, they can't give it back to him because that would break the fungibility of money. That would fundamentally break it would
so,
do society. So go ahead.
I'm pretty sure the example you're thinking of was actually with fiat currency. And if I remember correctly, it was like 1600s or 1700s in, around Europe. But
maybe there's other examples.
The key thing being the reason why the courts ruled that, fungibility was existed was because it was in the state's interest. They wanted their newfangled money that no one really accepted that much to be fungible, so it had some kind of advantage to get people to accept it. Whereas even now, would obviously depend on jurisdiction, but my understanding is usually it's only fiat in most places that has this sort of guaranteed by law fungibility. Now in practice, courts can kind of go all over the place, and a lot of them are more reasonable than others, but the real proper standard there is fiat in many places, just because they want to give it that advantage.
Right. So it's like it's legally supposed to be accepted as $1 equals $1, and like they, to some degree, it's like a price fixing of it is kind of what you're saying.
Well, I mean, the standard example is if I steal a car and then I sell that car to you, and you had and you had no reason to think it was suspicious, anything like that, in most jurisdictions you'll wind up losing that car. Whereas if I go and essentially sell you the fiat in exchange for something else, you're not going to lose the fiat. Mm-hmm. Even if, the actual notes physically went from the rightful owner to me, then to you, you're still not going to lose it. That's different in many jurisdictions.
Mm-hmm.
It's a privilege.
It's a privilege, and it's to protect the quality of currency. It's to protect the sort of the nature of currency as a thing.
And in particular, to protect a specific currency. I mean, again, I'm no lawyer, but I've heard that in some places they'll even make distinctions between the local currency and foreign currencies. So if this whole example was with foreign currency, you'd go lose the foreign currency. It's like not based on any kind of bigger legal principle. It's just, we want to go privilege our fiat currency.
Wow, I wasn't aware of that. That's really interesting. Yeah. So this is a legal fiction of sorts. It's a legal kind of protection for fiat currency. What impact? So my concern has always been that the KYC and the analytics and the biometric analysis of people that buy Bitcoin, sell Bitcoin, trade it, you know, spend it, right? That's actually a kind of slow capture, and that it can eventually sort of separate the market. Like maybe you'll end up having to pay a markup for coins that are KYC'd, or pay a markup for coins that are not KYC'd. I'm not sure which way it's going to go. It might depend on where you're at. What do you think of that? Do you think that there is a connection there?
I'd say like all these things are certainly possible. I think what we've seen is that in most countries, crypto has gotten successful enough, fast enough that that's not the path that the legal system seems to be taking. You know, just as an example, well, you know, hypothetically, this notion of stolen property would always apply. In reality, there's so many examples where the courts would never ask you to go return stolen property because it's just totally impractical. You know, I mean, suppose like I go steal, you know, a truckload of aluminum scrap, and I go and, you know, sell it to a smelter, and then the smelter goes and turns into other stuff. In theory, you could go track down millions of tons of aluminum that should be seized. But yeah, courts don't do that because it just looks ridiculous. And I think with crypto, it's being used widely enough that we're kind of in this place where courts seem to be saying, well, you know, yes, in theory, you could apply the law this way, but we're not really going to do that. But that still doesn't, like, the other part of privacy, though, is that even regardless of like seizure concerns, you know, losing your privacy is a big deal. And you may find that for certain purposes, it's quite hard to go use crypto, even though there isn't the seizure aspect that you're concerned about.
Right. Yeah, it's like there's like an escape velocity, right? Like it's actually quite difficult to catch a thief in crypto unless they end up putting it in an exchange, and then that's usually where they catch them. Do you have any thoughts, me?
No, I don't really.
Yeah, it's interesting.
I mean, the interesting thing when you mention kind of exchanges is there are quite a few examples of exchanges seizing stolen funds, but I can't think of any where it was clearly in the hands of an innocent third party. You know, I mean, I'm no expert on this kind of field, so maybe there are a few, but you know, at least I've never heard of an example where someone who is entirely unrelated to the theft had their money seized. You know, that I haven't heard of yet. Certainly, like it could happen kind of by accident in the early stages of an investigation, but I've never heard of a case where they were never able to get it back.
What's the difference then between these whitelisted coins and blacklisted coins?
Well, I'd say the way I put it is, in practice, whitelists and blacklists haven't really happened that much, you know, mainly because of privacy efforts. You know, like there are exchanges where if you deposit coins that have just recently come from certain sources, yeah, you know, they'll cause you problems. They might freeze your account, etc. But you know, I mean, I've been personally told face to face and kind of off the record conversations about this that they never look back more than like a step or two. Now, maybe some exchanges go further, but at least conversations I've had, it's always been, yeah, you know, we stop at like 2 places because it's ridiculous to go back further. You know, there's like, by the time you go back, you know, 10 steps in the chain, it could have come from anywhere because of this sort of velocity of mixing and because of things like CoinJoin.
Yeah, back in the day, I mean, I had, I won't mention the exchange, it's a very good exchange, but my email got hacked, and they had a little back door where somebody was able to clean out all of my Bitcoin on that exchange, and they felt bad about it, but it was really, they wouldn't make good on it because my email got hacked, even though they had the back door and I got it. We worked out a real nice agreement, so they let me trade free, I think, for a year or something. But I know they were going to run a whatever it is and invest to find those, and then I never heard anything back about it. But you know, you wonder, you know, in those cases, you know, what, you know, and it's always, usually it's on the exchanges where it happens. I mean, I don't know, maybe it doesn't, but I know we were going to do, I don't know what kind of a search it was, but I never heard anything after. So
yeah, it's
whoever
very
stole it got away with it.
Yeah.
Well, all this stuff's ultimately a social question, really. From a technical perspective, yes, you can go trace, coins indefinitely, but what that actually means in terms of, human meaning, well, the tech can't give you good answers for that. Like the moment, you've seen something go through 10 different steps in the chain, when you don't really know what a lot of those steps are, you can't really say much about those coins.
Yeah, it's mapping the human behavior to the on-chain behavior. That's really,
and that information just isn't there.
Yeah. Well, that's kind of optimistic. I mean, there's a very specific example of a blacklist that's active today, as far as I know, and it's the American government blacklisted something. I think it was like 2 Bitcoin addresses that were related to Iran, maybe Iran terrorists or something along those lines. I've never heard of any consequences to that yet, other than that the exchanges, I guess, gotta keep an eye on those addresses.
But what happens if they send it to an individual?
That's the question, right? And then how many hops are they going to be obligated to enforce that? And that's I think what we're getting at is that's actually a legal question.
Yeah.
That's
and
going to
it's
end up
a legal question that's influenced by technical reality. If the technical reality is, well, we saw these coins leave this address, and there are 20 steps in the chain, which no one really knows what any of this meant, and out at the end came something else. Judges are going to be reasonable, Same as my aluminum smelter example. The technical reality of metal recycling is that you just can't go keep track of exactly where every single thing came, and it's totally impractical to go seize it because it's being mixed with such a large volume of other material.
All right, so let's get into mixing a little bit, because there's kind of a, there's a growing privacy industry in Bitcoin. We have Samurai Wallet, which has been around for a while. We have Wasabi Wallet, which is somewhat new. It's been around for about a year or so, maybe a couple of years. And then there's also Join Market, which I actually haven't really looked into. So I'm not sure. Maybe you can explain it to us if you understand it. And then the last option that I really see right now is the Lightning Network as a sort of vehicle for privacy.
Yeah.
Where do you see the industry in this regard today, and how important is this issue? Because what I'm seeing is, my concern is that the sort of the liquidity and gets sort of captured by governments throughout the world in these sort of KYC, sort of completely transparent environments to the powers that be, right? And then they can start politically censoring the exits, right? And suddenly we're back at square one. We're back at political money that doesn't have easy escape valves. I think it's going to be a lot harder for them to deal with this if people start accepting Bitcoin as currency, and if there's kind of like a gray and black market to Bitcoin. But yeah, what do you think about this topic?
Well, I think it comes down to sort of political will and political reality. Something I like to go.
Oh, sorry, lost your audio there for a second. Hang on. Stop. What is going on?
We lost audio.
Yeah, we lost your audio there.
To sort of political will and political reality. Oh, did that cut out? Something I like to.
Yeah, your audio cut out. Okay, so political will and political reality. You're back?
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, so saying, the technical reality is the U.S. government has, insane power. Like I was saying, they can destroy all life on this planet pretty much by firing off all the nukes, and we'd be off, trying to go and grow tomatoes to avoid starving to death. But the political reality of that is that's not really an option. It's something that is tough for them to use. It's also tough for them to do in a way that's beneficial to them. And I think what we're seeing with Bitcoin is, because there's so many players now involved in Bitcoin, from all different parts of the financial world, it's tough to do anything to it that doesn't piss off people who are your political supporters.
Yeah, I think this is actually really interesting and really important. There's kind of, Bitcoin comes from a very libertarian place, and in many ways a very anarchistic place. I mean, at least some people would argue that. I think Satoshi Nakamoto at some point in the early commentary he did, it was like, well, I think we can market this to libertarians quite easily, right?
Yep.
But there's a sort of like an anti-politics sort of ethos to libertarianism. And I think I'm starting to think that playing like Bitcoin is big enough that it's not gonna, it's not, I don't see it politically captured, or I don't see a monoculture, a political monoculture in Bitcoin. Like there's people on the right, there's people on the left, there's people that don't care, there's transhumanists, there's like all kinds, right? And so maybe like playing like maybe there's some something with politics and Bitcoin that needs to be done to move it forward, right? To kind of, because there are legal attacks that you can see sort of being launched in it. But I mean, that's about as far as I've thought that through.
Well, I think the big thing is to have the tech in such a way that it makes the job of the politics easier. You know, if Bitcoin had one company behind it, it would take so much more political effort for it to survive. You know, like the tech is the tech makes it easier to do the politics, keep it alive. And, you know, just to give an example, I mean, so, you know, you mentioned like CoinJoin implementations and also Lightning. And a thing I would say is Lightning, you know, when you can go use it, has this nice property that the data associated with transactions is ephemeral. You know, you do a Lightning transaction, and I mean, for starters, like the default software that, you know, so many of these nodes run doesn't even keep logs. You know, it literally never writes down what money went where, and you know, even when it does, that information is just not public. It's, you know, hidden away on tons of little computers somewhere. And it's a very tough thing to go and monitor or track or do anything to.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, at the same time, the user experience is great. So you have a lot of people who think, yeah, this is good. I want to go use it.
Mm. Yeah, that makes me very optimistic about this question, because I think it's really important. I think we were sort of, you know, we're at risk of losing all privacy, right? Like it seems like there's these sort of structures rising of like, you know, full surveillance, right? Like somebody's talking about like blockchain and AI is like, what's the point of blockchain and AI if it's not sort of government enforcement and like, you know, like just these technocratic structures, right? I mean, we see it in China with the credit score, right? Like if you do something that the CCP doesn't like, boom, you can't even travel across state lines.
Yep.
So,
you know, and I'd say a more recent one that really worries me is, you know, particularly early on, I mean, people's response to this whole COVID pandemic. It was all about, well, you know, because it's public health, now we'll accept tracking devices. You know, there was like some effort to go and try to create exposure tracking software and things like that, you know, that would be privacy preserving. But the medical reality of it is that software doesn't work. It's useless. The thing that actually works for medical tracking is to go violate people's privacy on an enormous scale.
It's like, how much data do they need, you know? Like,
I mean,
already, like, what else do they need?
Like, the public stuff we know is that they were doing things like getting cell phone logs from literally everyone. You know, like part of how, you know, China kind of, to at least some extent, you know, kept a lid on this stuff was getting full surveillance data from every single camera they had to go track exactly where everyone was, and then run their computer models. Yeah. And it's funny, like people like to go and, you know, say, well, you know, masks destroy facial recognition. No, they don't. Just go look at China. They went and found other ways to go track you. I mean, for starters, you can just, like, when you have the density cameras they do, you can just track someone as they leave their house all the way to their destination and back again. And that's, you know, the masks do nothing there. And I'd say the big issue there is it's an example of something where the whole, I mean, particularly like on one side of the political spectrum, people backtracked on previous discussions about privacy. It suddenly was, okay, now this is acceptable, now this is justified. And when you have, you know, when you have that kind of mindset where, well, you know, we're going to fight really hard until it's justified, there's so many different ways to go justify things. You know, I mean, we've seen this in political left as well, where censorship 20 years ago didn't seem that justified, whereas now tons of people advocate for it. Yeah,
and it was kind of like a slippery slope of sorts. I mean, a very you know, first it was ISIS that was promoting their culture and ideology on social media. And then suddenly it was like, okay, well, they're terrorists, so I guess we should block them, right? And then
Though
once
I think the
that
big
domino
one wasn't
fell,
so
it's just,
much like the one I'd say wasn't so much ISIS. It was more the left wing versus the right wing. You know, I think
well,
where it
today
really
it is.
kicked up. But
Today
I'd
it
say
is.
like the
Yeah.
thing that really kicked it up, you know, among more mainstream people was, you know, as the left wing didn't look like they were winning that well. It's like, oh yeah, we got to go censor, you know, right wing accounts. And some of it's also, of course, the right wing trying to go censor the left, but I mean, they've kind of always done that. Some extreme right wing talk, not libertarian stuff,
Yeah,
which
the
doesn't
old
really fit
school.
neatly. But,
Yeah. Well, I believe it was the Christian right that was censorious in like the 80s, I guess, or I don't know when exactly, but like a couple decades ago or so. And then now it's the left that's because they have the power levers now, right? So now they're on the helm, right?
Yep.
It's Silicon Valley that's running the show now.
Yep.
Well,
And it's ironic because then part of what Silicon Valley gets accused of by people on both sides is censorship. But
right. Yeah, they're censoring
you know,
everybody.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know, it's just there's no like people don't have consistent standards with this stuff.
Yeah.
You
Well,
know?
it's a very complex problem. Joe Rogan was actually just talking about it with Snowden on his show, and they went really deep, which it was really nice. But it's a very difficult problem because on the one hand, you can argue like, okay, well, there's terrorists clearly sort of promoting violence and trying to grow their empire, right? It's like, you know, at what point do we have a duty to push the button, given that we do have a button to push, right? And that's where there's this problem, this sort of God
and I'd say
paradox, right?
that's the tech problem, which is the very fact there's a button you can go push to do this stuff is where the danger is. You know, again, this is how during a COVID pandemic, suddenly governments had databases full of every single person's movements tracked by cell phone because the data was there. So it didn't take many phone calls to go get the data into government hands. You know, like I think that's the difference between tech that protects your privacy and then trying to protect it legally. You know, I mean, another horrifying example was World War II. There's tons of examples of censuses that literally led to people getting marched off to death camps.
Yeah.
You know, like you can't take this, you can't collect this information.
Yeah, and it's like people don't understand that we're like on a precipice, you know. Like this is like all it takes is a real bad political turn and suddenly this stuff can get weaponized and become
Well, it's gotten a lot
horrific.
worse, but I lived through the day when there was the fairness doctrine, and it was actually, I think, even worse then, because then the debate was, well, the networks and there were no political commentators that like there are not now that are, you know, blatantly Republican or blatantly supporting different candidates. If they did that, then you'd have this bureaucratic fairness doctrine. Well, this isn't fair. They all go to the FCC, and I think the FCC was kind of the arbitrator. They got rid of that, which was great. And then we have the internet that really bloomed, and now we're seeing the repression coming. That kind of started with, you know, Alex Jones and a lot of people. And I actually posted on Medium a picture of you know, slaughtered goats, and I was deplatformed for about 24 hours. They would never tell me that's what it was, but I'm sure that's what it was. And,
like, come on, it's, you know, this is how your food gets produced. But right. You know, the fairness doctrine's a funny one though, because I think right now the left wing would be in really deep trouble if they managed to go get a fairness doctrine in the wrong way. And I think you see this in the discussion you have about, you know, legitimate news and what is legitimate and isn't, because it's so much that discussion's based not on what the facts are, but rather on authority.
Oh yeah.
You know, you're supposed to go and look at the authorities rather than look at, well, what's actually true or not.
Right. When the
And-
authority determines what's fair, that's the problem. You can file a complaint all you want, but it's going to be, a bureaucrat that's going to decide what's fair.
And like Bitcoin's interesting this way because Bitcoin is one of those technologies which fundamentally is about truth. You and I can agree on things because of the Bitcoin blockchain that we couldn't otherwise. And that doesn't fit neatly into any political spectrum.
Yeah, it's a settlement system of its own. It doesn't depend on something else, which is really great.
Yeah.
It's a very powerful thing. Let's talk a little bit about some of these technological solutions, because justice, whether it's there or not, it's definitely slow, and the legal questions, they're interesting, and I think they're worth exploring more. But let's talk about the technological side of things, because in a sense, if they can't do anything about it, then you don't need them. If the courts can't actually enforce the law, then that's And I think in some cases this is a good thing. Obviously, bad people can get away with it with bad things too, but overall, most people are not criminals, right? So it's kind of like,
in the history of the world, by far the most people getting killed and injured by bad people are in the hands of governments. That's just the reality. A couple common criminals can do nowhere near as much damage as one Nazi Germany ever could.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, history is very simple.
Well, and that's why, United States was founded on limited government. That's why we have been able to advance without the concept of limiting that power. We're all at the mercies of the latest tyrant.
Yeah, it's definitely concerning. Somebody asked me. I kind of asked on Twitter for questions to ask you, and one of the questions was, what do you think about Samurai Wallet? There's been a bit of a drama in Twitter between Samurai Wallet and Wasabi Wallet, and we don't have to get into it. I don't know the details of it too much, but the brief is that, well, anyway, maybe let's just start with that. What do you think of Samurai Wallet as a company in their implementation? Then maybe we can get into some of the details or just kind of explore the topic a little bit.
Yeah, the thing that bothers me about Samurai Wallet is there are things that it looks like they've kind of hyped, and I haven't looked into them in too much detail, and I couldn't tell you all the difference between like Samurai and Wasabi, but the sense I get from Samurai is that aspects of their software, they've kind of hyped things up more than they necessarily get out of privacy. Like when the clear examples was a bit more early on when they were getting blockchain data, and their only option was to go and get it from a single source in a way that kind of wrecked a lot of the privacy. And like right there, it's like, well, hang on, if you're not making that really, really clear to your users that this is how this works, that's just dubious.
They were getting data from where?
I believe it was, if not blockchain.info, like some servers run by Samurai. When to do this kind of stuff right, to get the DNS or coin joins and stuff, you really got to do more clever protocols than that, or run full nodes with indexes. Like there's no options there other because putting that single point of failure in there is just dangerous. You might as well skip the whole decentralized coin join thing and just have people go through a central mixer.
If they were pulling like user account data from blockchain.info through their API, then that's definitely a vulnerability, like a sort of leak of data. I think that the main concern that people seem to have against Samurai Wallet is that, definitely smash that like, folks. Come on, we got 18 people watching and 10 likes, and when we got more people on other platforms as well, and this will garner more views. But hit that like button so more people see this. I think this is a really, really good and important conversation. One of the main concern that people seem to have with Wasabi Wallet is that the mobile client, I guess, doesn't have any kind of a full node in it, because it feels like it's becoming possible to add a full node to a cell phone, but the critique is that they have all the XPubs, and so maybe if you're using the mobile wallet, to use their privacy services, then you're giving them the XPubs, and therefore they own you basically, even though they'll deny that they keep them, right?
I'll point out, I mean, you certainly these days you can go run full nodes on phones because of pruning. You know, the UTXO set just isn't that big, so that's totally a feasible option. And
That's great to know.
You know, people have the bandwidth on Wi-Fi and other stuff, so that's totally doable. But yeah, I mean, that's it in a nutshell. I mean, if you know your XPubs are getting sent somewhere else, someone learns a whole lot of stuff, and if you're not really clear in your communications about who's learning what, that's dubious. Now, interestingly, like a Claire wallet, which I use, has that same kind of issue, but in their UI, it makes it really clear right on the screen the fact that you are, you know, getting your information and, you know, potentially losing your privacy there to, you know, it displays like the URLs of the Electrum servers it's contacting. And they're not making privacy claims, which then I think, you know, makes that kind of level of messaging even more acceptable.
Right. Yeah, I mean, obviously the standard for a privacy-oriented wallet needs to be higher. I to their credit, in this drama, they've sort of said and cited, I guess, all their articles or all their commentary that they've made, saying, well, yeah, no, this is a known issue, and if Samurai Wallet is in your threat model, in other words, if you're concerned about Samurai Wallet hacking you, then yeah, you shouldn't use it, which is not a great answer.
I don't like that answer either.
It's not a good answer.
Yeah.
And I think before this conversation, I would have given him this, like, okay, yeah, well, if you technically have to have the XPubs because you can't run a full node on a wallet, then at least you can technologically justify that, right? Yeah. But if you can do prune nodes on phones, then actually it isn't justifiable.
Yeah, and I'd say this, I mean, I've seen this kind of deflection a lot, as in, well, you got to trust us anyway for kind of these other reasons. And the reality is, trust comes in a bunch of different flavors. And the trust of trusting people with your privacy when you have no real way of detecting that it's being violated, that is a much higher bar than most other types of trust. You know, at least with, for instance, software, you have some ability of investigating what software did, for instance. You know, maybe if not you personally, someone else in the community. You know, also with software, often it's the vendor, because it goes through third parties like Android. The person who wrote the software has a much harder time targeting you specifically. You know, I may want to go and steal all your money or, you know, violate your privacy, but if I'm writing software and I don't know exactly what your phone is, it's much harder for me to target that than if I'm getting data from your wallets and I can do a test transaction, for instance, and then figure out, all right, well, what XPubs are associated with this? Now I can go track you, right? Like it's a different type of threat model, and privacy is a very tough bar there.
Yeah, as privacy companies, they're supposed to not keep anything, and then nobody from the out. It's difficult for people from the outside to see, but then you have this kind of privileged knowledge if you are keeping.
And, you know, unfortunately, like, your best options there are, of course, you know, running full nodes on the devices when you can, and also something that I think we need to see more often is people running full, you know, like I should software infrastructure to run a full node at home and have your wallets connect to that.
Yeah, and I believe that, so Samurai does allow for this. You can run a Dojo node, which is a full Bitcoin node, and plug into it, and then you no longer have that exposure. However, one of the things is that apparently the privacy pools, the anonymity pools, get mixed with the ones from the mobile clients. And then the other thing is, I mean,
that's a huge issue in CoinJoin.
Right. So
because now they're learning stuff that impacts other people's use of CoinJoin. Right, because now, you know, because they have this info to so many different CoinJoins, they potentially de-anonymize everyone.
Yeah, maybe explain CoinJoin a little, because I don't know if you understand CoinJoin. But
I really don't.
Yeah.
In fact, I was going to ask you, when are we going to get a full node here that we can
get in? Well, I'm looking into
it.
I was
behind,
thinking,
you know, I know I've got a full node on my website.
Yeah, we got one on the server, but like, I was thinking about running a Dojo node, but right now I'm not sure. So I'm kind of looking into which implementation to run. Maybe talk a little bit about what CoinJoin, like the foundation, because you have actually a career background with this. So
Yeah, so CoinJoin, funny enough, that I actually came up with the name of all things. Like
Really?
it kind of dates back. I mean, it's hard to kind of pin down who invented it per se. It sort of like naturally comes out of the protocol, but Greg Maxwell went to a lot of effort to popularize it. And in that process, he actually asked me to come up with a good name for it. I've got a fine arts degree, so I guess he was the best person he could think of. And like the name suggests, it joins coins. And to understand that, I think you need to know what a coin is in the Bitcoin protocol. And a coin just means an output of a transaction, right? Because transactions they take coins, they merge them together, so to speak, and then split them again into all the different places you want to go pay in a transaction. And your wallet is a collection of coins. So CoinJoin says, well, if I have a transaction, right, and it spends 2 coins and then produces 2 other coins, you can make the assumption that the money that went into the transaction is owned by the same person, or is owned by the same person, and the money that came out therefore must be going to either, to sort of fixed people, right? So if you see a transaction with 2 inputs and 2 outputs, chances are the 2 inputs came from the same person, 1 output went back as change, whatever was the difference, and then one of the outputs went to pay someone. And that's, you can get a lot of info off that.
Yeah, the example I like to use is imagine you have people throw money in a bag, right? And it's a magic bag, right? Because this is crypto magic, so there's magic in the bag. And so if you put the $1 bill, this magic will turn it into 100 pennies, and then it'll turn every denomination into 100 pennies, and it'll just mix up the bag, and then you take out what you put in pennies, right? And then you don't know whose cash you originally had because they're all fungible. Again, we end up in fungibility again. And so that's, I guess, sort of the easy metaphorical explanation of it.
I mean, at a technical level, I mean, it really comes down to, I want to go pay someone, you want to go pay someone. We combine our transactions so that the money coming in comes from both of us. Then the money going out goes to who we want to go pay. And, that's kind of that. There's some nuances to exactly what the dollar amounts are and how you go and get privacy on that. But essentially, from the point of view of someone trying to reverse engineer the blockchain, if you will, figure out where did the money come from, where did it go, they now have this problem that multiple unrelated transactions are getting added together, and they have to, piece apart that. And that's a very significant barrier.
Yeah.
However, by comparison, with Lightning, that data just doesn't exist, right? Like they have no way of knowing where anything went. They have no way of knowing if a transaction even happened, other than sort of the other threat model. Of course, I'm running a bunch of Lightning nodes, but from the blockchain data itself, there's just nothing.
Yeah, we're gonna get into Lightning in a moment, but before we get just a couple of quick questions. What do you think of Neutrino? Is this one of the best sort of prune node implementations, or what other prune node?
Oh, the Neutrino SPV stuff. Yeah. I haven't looked into it that much. I honestly, I'm dubious about all the SPV stuff in general, so I kind of haven't really looked into that.
What's a prune node then? What? How do we?
Sorry, not prune node. SPV.
SPV, right?
Yeah.
Okay, I thought that Neutrino was a form of pruning, but you're right. It's actually an SPV. It's an SPV client.
It sort of comes to the, don't quote me on this one, but like I say, I just don't pay attention to that stuff. Period. These days.
Okay. And do you have any thoughts on Wasabi? Do you think that, I don't know, what do you think about their implementation? Any kind of big red flags or anything like that?
Well, I haven't looked into the the code or anything, but I think the big thing of Wasabi is, no one seems to be raising too many red flags about it, right? Mm-hmm. Like it doesn't give me that kind of bad feel of the way the Samurai stuff does, where it looks like people aren't being entirely honest.
Right. So I mean, part of the drama. So go ahead.
And I say, like, Join Market is sort of another example here where it's kind of an older thing, but I mean, I've met the guy behind Join Market. It's a boring, simple thing that works. right? Like that's kind of what you want to hear in software often.
Right. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, if it's very exciting and dramatic, it's probably more complicated than it needs to be. So one part of the drama that happened between Samurai Wallet and Wasabi was that Samurai Wallet published through oxt.me, which is kind of like a blockchain explorer organization they published a vulnerability on Wasabi that said that there was they have found a way to deterministically recreate the coin joins in Wasabi, right? And that means that basically you lose the randomness and you lose the privacy is my vague understanding of the topic, right? So, and then in response they were like, well, but at least we're not keeping everybody's sex pubs. Kind of what was the retaliation, and that's basically what.
I mean, assume for sake of argument that the flaw Samurai found was real. That response by Wasabi is completely correct. I mean, it's kind of the difference between doing something where you make a mistake and doing something where the fundamental design is kind of dubious. Like, I would trust the people who make a mistake and then try to go fix it more than I'd trust the people who have a really dubious design where there's so much trust involved in one entity.
There it is, folks. Samurai, if you guys want to get your credibility back, you're going to have to build a prune node for mobile devices. And
we could use more implementations of that. I mean,
explain what it, because you guys are talking way above a lot of us out there. What is pruning? What is the prune node?
Well, so originally every node had a full copy of the entire blockchain, which isn't actually necessary to validate new blocks, because to validate new blocks, you only have to know what coins can be spent, not what coins have already been spent in the past. So prune node just says, well, rather than keep the entire blockchain, we'll throw away, all of the older parts of it, and then keep a database of all the coins in existence. And the one complication there, sometimes you got to roll back, right? Like sometimes blocks get reorgs and you got to go backwards, but the data to go backwards, kind of the differences between one block and the other, that is a much smaller amount of data for any realistic amount of rollback than the entire blockchain. So long story short,
is a Raspberry a prune node? Then is that a
no? A Raspberry Pi is a little computer that you can run a Bitcoin node on. So basically, what I'm hearing from you is that it's basically a version of the Bitcoin history where you remove all the coins that have already been spent. Is that kind of the idea?
Well, so the way the software actually works is it has a database of coins in existence at any particular point in time, right? And that database that database is only accurate as of a particular block height. Now, to go backwards, it keeps another data structure, which is sort of the differences between blocks. So it can apply that kind of in reverse. It's like if you had an accounting ledger, right? And, you have the number at the bottom, and then you go keep some, sums going back, say, 10 days that you could go reverse to go roll things back. But all the transactions prior to that, you just don't have it all, right? And that transactions prior, that's the blockchain data, and that's the part that prune nodes throw away. So they keep recent stuff, but not old stuff.
Right. Yeah. Instead of keeping, I don't know how many hundreds of thousands of blocks we have now, something like.
Yeah. Like, so is it 650,000 or so these days?
Yeah.
Which,
instead of keeping 600,
300 gigs or something.
Data, you keep what, a few hundred, like,
Well, yeah, a small amount of blocks, and then the size of the database of coins, is on the order of a few gigabytes. So relatively small.
Right. Yeah. So that's what a prune node is. It's a much smaller Bitcoin blockchain, basically. It's kind of like a polished one, or pruned, so to speak.
Yeah, it's the bare minimum you need to verify a new block as it comes in. Now, here's a key thing: a prune node gives you full security, but what you can't do with a prune node is let someone else check the whole blockchain, because you just don't have that data, right?
So you have the data that you personally need, but not data to help other people figure out what they have, and
Yeah, like they can't start from scratch, right? If they have a prune node that's reasonably up to date, they can, use, you can still give them recent data as it comes in, recent blocks, but you can't help someone resync the blockchain from scratch, right? Because you just don't have that data to let them independently verify that everything's correct.
Right.
I personally have unpruned nodes sitting in my apartment so that I can go verify this and do tech stuff on that. And I'd say the other issue with pruned nodes is that some wallets, they need that data for various reasons. They might want to go resync a wallet from some old historical data, or some Lightning implementations, they got to go look up old transactions. There's a bunch of reasons why they might need that, but better wallet designs don't need this. Better wallet designs figure out ways to go keep only the data they need. So and that takes more work.
Yeah, so the dilemma that wallets used to have, I guess, before pruned node technology became sort of more sophisticated, was that you have a wallet client. The user is asking you what their account balance is, but they don't have a full node. In other words, they don't have a history of all the transactions in Bitcoin and all. So they don't have that. So they have to ask you for it. And then what do? Well, you're running a node. So you have to get their master public key, which is basically their public address of all the accounting, and then run it against the database, get the information and feed it back to them, right? And that's a kind of point of trust and privacy wallets is obviously.
Well, in particular, so the XPub thing that Samurai uses, that's a very particularly dangerous way of doing it, because you get the full list unambiguously. There's other ways to be more clever about that, to give away less information, but the XPub's sort of the laziest way to do it. That's cheapest for Samurai, cheapest for the people running the servers. It's the fastest possible implementation for the client, but it has this big gaping hole there. It has this big disadvantage. So,
well, I think we definitely, people should pay attention to this conversation, because I think we could definitely push it forward.
Yeah.
Okay, so what happens in an environment where Bitcoin, goes up, 5x, and suddenly the fees are $50 a pop, and CoinJoin now starts to get priced out, unless you're, I guess, a wealthy player.
Well, the interesting thing is CoinJoin is actually potentially cheaper than a normal Bitcoin transaction, right? Because the simplest coin joins actually use a little bit less data on average, right? Because you're sharing data, sharing some sort of fixed overhead across multiple people. And this actually gets even better with certain improvements to, the way we use pub keys and so on, where you might be able to do signature aggregation, where, long story short is like, you can combine multiple signatures so that one signature covers the entire transaction. So if you have, say, 10 inputs, rather than having, say, 600 bytes of data for signatures, you might only have 60. And that actually, that advantage you only get with CoinJoin.
Yeah, it's masked and taproot and all these sort of other magical words, right?
Yep.
Yeah, there's some progress, right? Wasn't there something merged recently in that regard?
Yeah, the what
Something got
implementation
merged.
was? Yeah, not masked, but like part of Taproot or something like that.
Yeah, it was part of Taproot. Yeah. Anyway, so that's there's progress there. That's good.
Yeah. But honestly, like
completely lost.
Stick on my tracer and keep it simple.
Yeah.
Honestly, though, like I'd say for all this, the big thing is like Lightning works so well. I don't really see the sort of $50 coin join thing being much of a problem, even if other parts of tech don't get better, precisely because, as long as Lightning's sitting around, like that's just as good as CoinJoin, if not better.
Yeah, Lightning is really interesting in that regard because it is offline. So, you create a 2 of 2.
Well, off-chain is the term I'd use.
It's off-chain, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's off-chain. It's not offline, it's off-chain. That's right.
Yeah.
It's just private account. I don't know if we should get into like technicals of Lightning right now, but that's interesting. So are you generally optimistic then about kind of privacy in this industry? Sounds like you're liking the way Lightning is developing.
Maybe the way to put it is I'm more optimistic about privacy in Bitcoin than I am in like general life.
Right. Well,
I have a question.
I think we face bigger problems overall than Bitcoin privacy.
Okay, that's good to know.
At one time, I used to mint gold coins. So I'm familiar with all the technology. You roll out the sheet, and then you have a tolerance involved, and so forth. and actually your basic cost of a small coin is the same as a large coin. So they're really not interchangeable. And of course, one of the services, I think a legitimate government service, is seigniorage, which is the difference between the face value of a coin and its actual intrinsic value. And then I was watching a thing on scams in Vegas, and there was this guy that they were able to scam Vegas tokens. And the way that the casinos got around it now is apparently they put some kind of embedded
RFC. They put RFC chips.
RFID.
And I was thinking, what, in my view, since we really have denationalized money with Bitcoin, I think that it's possible now. And if we are our own bankers, then isn't it our responsibility to pick up the slack when it comes to seigniorage, having a workable, actually maybe even an actual token? And it would, with a declared reserve, but where it could be honored at the Bitcoin price, almost like.
Well, I mean, that's what Blockstream Liquid is basically.
That's the next thing I need to go. That's where I see the potential that I've seen. It seems like, but I'm talking about a physical token that you could actually carry in your pocket.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say the challenge for that is you're competing against fiat. Once you have a physical setting, cash works really, really well. Other than the one issue of, well, what's it denominated in? Everything about cash is wonderful. It is wonderful privacy. It's easy to verify. I can't say enough good things about cash. But, and I'd say for the things we use cash, the exchange rate issues don't really matter that much.
Right.
Provided you have a way of storing value, what you actually go use day to day, it's inconvenience, but it's not sort of a deal ender, which makes it really hard to compete with something like cash. I just don't see like any physical Bitcoin token scheme having an easy time getting off the ground. The market is just too small.
Well, yeah, I mean, the gold coin market was too. Gold coins never circulated. We were on a gold standard, but people like, and I've written about that about Roger Beard. He doesn't get it. Gold. The only time it circulated as money was during the California gold rush in California. The rest of the time, the only people that have gold were the banks, the governments, and rich people. Yeah. If you were a poor person or middle class, you could own gold, but most people didn't. Just everything was priced.
It was silver, actually, right? Silver was.
Well, the coinage was silver, and the face value was in gold, but the intrinsic value was much less. So that was by issuing silver and nickel coinage, that was a revenue stream for governments, which they're actually providing a service for the people because they've got sound money now, and there is
sound until the right one act to go decouple it.
Right, until they stop honoring the face value. Yeah. But they still have that, and that's what happened when they stopped redeeming the coinage for gold. They came out with these silver certificates, and you can still redeem a silver certificate.
I mean, the thing is, like, with Bitcoin, you could do such a better job of that with such better auditability. There's so many crypto things you go do, but I think the reality is the market just isn't there. The one exception we've seen is the niche of sort of financial trading, where, again, Blockstream Liquid and things like Tether for US dollars, they provide a technical capability that people find useful. But, that's sort of inherent to very kind of niche financial trading market that needs those technical capabilities. Other markets don't care.
Do you think that the demand problem there is a consequence of the strength of the dollar as a currency? Because if that was the case, then maybe we would see demand for that again. Like Venezuela is one of the ones that's always being brought up, or current, like Argentina, and so on.
I think your issue there is, even in a place like Venezuela, you're still competing against the strength of the U.S. dollar,
right? Because they still want dollars. Yeah.
And the second part of that is, in cases where U.S. dollars can't be used because of local prohibition, and crackdowns and so on, your Bitcoin isn't going to do any better, right? It would still be like in this scenario where you're trying to do physical tokens, it's still a physical thing that can easily be seized. Now, Bitcoin has potential to be good in certain situations as unseizable money, and there's plenty of examples from around the world where people are using Bitcoin to reduce the chance of their funds getting seized when other currencies are illegal. Potentially even Bitcoin's illegal, but physical tokens, they throw away that advantage because they're physical.
Right. Yeah, they can be seized. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, it's unconfiscatable enough in its digital form.
Yeah.
Yeah. The exchange points are kind of tricky. You got to end up with a black market or gray markets.
Yeah, well, I was thinking of just something that to redeem those into the local jurisdiction, that's another thing. But just to keep it all kind of like what Arthur Hayes has done with the BitMaker exchange.
Right.
I mean, he's kept everything Bitcoin, which is, I think, a huge advance.
Well, remember, people have done this, like Kazakius coins and a whole bunch of other stuff.
Coins, yeah.
Your Kazakius coins, just straight up put Bitcoin private keys. And there's plenty of ways you do that so that the token actually is that value. There's still a trust issue, which is can you trust that someone hasn't taken that inherent value out of it? But I think like both of those, all those issues are overshadowed by the fact that cash is just so effective.
Yeah, let's talk about the trusting a little bit too, because you and I have been talking about this, and kind of like doing circles around this topic for a while. So he comes from. So you talk a lot about commercial banking, right? There's this document called the Lost Art of Commercial Banking. I don't know how much time you have. I don't want to take up all of your time. How much time do you have?
Let me explain my view a little bit, because maybe I can clarify.
Sure.
I see like the real, crypto heads that, I kind of refer them to like the school of Murray Rothbard. He wrote a book, the Case for 100% Gold Dollar. And when he did that, I actually called him a gold socialist, and Milton Friedman wrote to me and said, "Oh, here's my article on gold standards and pseudo gold standards." And so that's kind of how I view the crypto world. And then my mentor, E.C. Harwood, who founded the American Institute for Economic Research, who I think Jeffrey Tucker heads up now. And but he wrote back in the late 70s about the lost art of sound commercial banking, and he described, that was the innovation of the 19th century, that the banks actually did create a non-inflationary, self-liquidating commercial paper. That, and of course, Milton Friedman was a monetarist. He wanted a fixed supply or whatever, but the banking actually solved the problem, that they could expand the money supply and contract the money supply depending upon the market factors and the quality of the loans. If one bank, had loaned a bunch of money on buggy whips while the cars were being made, their paper wasn't very good, and their reserves would be hit. But the creation money was limited to the new goods and services coming into the market, and that's what created. And that's what I kind of distinguish between Bitcoin and the Bitcoin standard. And that, and the other thing, when I asked Colonel Harwood, said, "When I want to make a gold coin with what do you want on that gold coin?" And he said, "For integrity, there is no substitute." And so that's what I'm saying. I don't think it's the technology alone. There has to be a complete moral shift in what we're doing, and then it will work. Otherwise, we're going to have this clunky thing, and we can't incorporate the innovations that were made at the turn of the 19th century. So that's kind of what I want to throw up. And what do you think of that? In other words, is it more than just a technological thing? Isn't this really, isn't sound money going to also depend on men with integrity? And that's what I see as lacking in
if it needs to depend.
Go ahead. Okay.
So here's the distinction I'd make. With crypto, if it needs to depend on people with integrity, we failed. Yeah, the whole point of crypto is to get rid of the need for people with integrity. And it's interesting, like the sort of traditional I mean, almost like sort of textbook bank money creation that you're talking about is really hard to make work with crypto because it's so easy to go audit.
When you talk about crypto, you're talking about cryptography or crypto coins like altcoins?
Crypto coins, you know, and also with cryptography, right? Because it's cryptography is a thing that defeats this kind of money creation. You know, even if we're talking, I mean, even if we were talking about fiat currencies where someone, you know, has a money supply and they say, all right, this is how many tokens are out there, you know, we'll do this, that, and the other. Cryptography still defeats your ability to then do things that banks have done before, because everyone can easily know, well, is my money actually backed by this claimed supply, or are they playing games with it, right? I mean, Tether is an interesting example of this. I can't verify whether or not my Tether is actually backed by US dollars, but what I can do is verify, well, what are the total claims on this? Which makes it much harder for Tether to do certain things with it.
You can verify, what is it you can verify?
Well, with Tether, I can't verify that US dollars are actually backing my tokens, right? In a cryptographic sense. Like, that's just fundamentally impossible. But what I can cryptographically verify is what is the outstanding amount that they may owe.
So what's the outstanding amount of Tether units in the market? That can be completely trustlessly cryptographically verified.
And that defeats a lot of games that people would like to go play.
Right, and that's the benefit of Bitcoin, and I understand that, and that's why I really do make a distinction between what I see being Bitcoin, which is what standard is based on. It's like the difference between physical gold and the gold standard. On the gold standard, you had all kinds of people. Everybody was on the gold standard, yet most people didn't know about it. Very few really, had the gold reserves. Again, it was limited to the wealthy, to the banks, to the government. And as an individual, you could have gold. And of course, that was the gold that was seized when they.
Well, I mean, more to the point, the thing with the gold standard was fractional banking was absolutely possible.
Yes.
Right? Like, that's the fundamental issue there. Yes. And cryptography, right? Not just crypto coins, but cryptography makes that a much harder thing to go pull off without people realizing. And because of the culture around Bitcoin, I think fractional reserve Bitcoin banking is a very hard sell. Other than to sort of niche markets where people are explicitly, looking for this to go get returns. Certainly people will go lend to their Bitcoin, but that's sort of it's a much more clear relationship. And I think it feels different to people than putting your money in a bank account and then, not really thinking why you're getting a bit of interest off of it.
Well, and the problem is that Bitcoin denominated loans are actually a terrible bet for the person that gets the loan, because then they have to pay it back in Bitcoin denomination, which is likely to go up, over time.
But remember
unless it doesn't, then.
But remember, that may be terrible for most people, but there will be people in certain situations where it makes sense, right? It's a financial tool.
It makes sense for miners, and yes.
Yeah, and at certain times it'll make sense too, right? Like,
yeah. And also, it's not an inherent thing about Bitcoin, right? The Bitcoin price could stabilize enough that Bitcoin loans become more popular, right? There's tons of things that could happen there.
Yeah.
Well,
whereas the cryptographic auditability of Bitcoin is fundamental to it. That's very hard to avoid without it being very clearly that you've avoided it.
Right. So I mean, like, we're kind of driving at the question of private banking in the Bitcoin industry as I think as a way of scaling it, right?
Well, I mean, I'm just wondering. I understand why Bitcoin is Bitcoin, but I guess what I'm saying is, I do think that there can be sound banking, and the bank it also developed organically, and the way it developed was, the banks would make an estimation that the money creation was limited to these new products coming into the marketplace. So the money was actually created for a period of time to pay off the suppliers, to pay the help, and then as those products were sold, then those notes were retired. Now, that also created this tremendous boom. So in effect, the money supply was growing, but it also, you could redeem it not just for the gold, not just for Bitcoin, but you can redeem it for anything else. And in order to hit that hyper Bitcoinization, that's what I think needs to be reached. In other words, I think it's going to depend on men of integrity as much as with an uncompromisable standard, which is Bitcoin.
I just don't think the tech is suited for that, because it creates such a strong cultural aversion. I'll go this way. I'm not saying what you're saying is impossible. I'm just saying the fact that auditability is easy with Bitcoin changes the social dynamics, because it's so, it makes it harder to kind of do things like that without it being.
But that's what makes it the standard. That's what makes it the standard, so that men of integrity can use.
Here's the thing. I think if Bitcoin becomes sort of a standard in the way you're talking about, I think it'll just take a different path. It doesn't need to take that path. It can take other paths. I suspect the sort of the commercial banking kind of standard you're talking about, that really, the fact that gold was the thing underlying that, I think was inevitable regardless of the banking, because during particular time periods in a certain technological framework, gold is by far your best way to store money. It's available, it doesn't rust, and you can easily measure it. It's sufficiently dense to be practical. I mean, there is no substitute for gold when you're talking about, say, the 18th century, 1700s, right? Like, there aren't good substitutes for it. Well, the world's different now.
So one thing we're talking about here is the commercial banking in the sense of a credit agency, right? A credit issuing agency that is, on a standard of money that is not centralized, right? Like, it's not a federal, you can't go to the Federal Reserve and get bailed out if you make bad loans. In the Bitcoin standard, you better be making good loans, otherwise you're gonna end up losing your collateral and go bankrupt.
Well, and on the gold standard, you better be making good loans too.
And the same on gold,
exactly. And I mean, not in the gold standard. I mean, there's been examples of fiat where the central banks did not provide bailouts, and banks would go fail.
Right.
Right. Like, bailouts don't have to be inherent to fiat.
Yeah.
It's a choice governments make. It's certainly a much easier choice, but it is still a choice.
Well, and the way the commodities exchanges evolved is they had memberships, and like I say, when one member would get in trouble, everybody else had to basically make good on it, and the retail customer was never hurt because everybody has to, and that's why the memberships on these exchanges, they would fluctuate. Sometimes they'd be worth $500,000, sometimes they'd be worth almost nothing because there's a big assessment coming up.
Yeah.
But I just think the old clearinghouse method does work, and it solves this. In other words, it's a market created money expansion, and it's a non-inflation.
But here's something you might not be considering, which is, in terms of information, we live in a very different world than where any of that came out. It's so much easier for people to collect information on who they're potentially making a loan to. So that type of mechanism could very well be replaced by peer-to-peer lending, to give an example, or, business to business lending. In fact, one of my favorite examples of lending, and I think people often don't realize this, is sort of standard net 30 days credit terms that you see in supply contracts and so on. That's an example of lending. It's one of the biggest sources of credit for businesses. And the reason why it's so effective is your suppliers tend to have far more information on you than your banks do. A supplier has at least many industries, a supplier has a much better understanding of how good your business is doing and how likely you are to pay them back than any bank could. Thus, they can essentially offer credit at lower rates. That's an example of peer-to-peer lending, if you will.
Too is a lot of the banks, for example, the lenders of livestock, the banks would tend to be specialized, but that would also have a problem, because when that industry sector would get into trouble because some of them are very cyclical, like crops and livestock. They could also get into trouble. So
it's funny. It's the
about their lenders, but sometimes it doesn't make any difference. The whole industry collapses. You still got a problem.
Well, like that's sort of that's an inherent problem with lending, which is the more specialized you are at it, the better you can be at pricing risk. But the more risk you have that every single one of the people you're lending to is going to go under all at once. Again, going back to like 30-day, credit terms, that's precisely the risk. If, you're selling fertilizer to one geographical area, inherently, pretty much everyone in your area is going to have risks in common.
I do a lot of, you ever get a pre-recorded message on your phone?
Like a voice message?
Yeah, that's what my original business was, Peter. I didn't know if you knew that. So it's kind of a funny thing when you talk about credit. I will never issue a credit to any candidate, but I always have to have a political consultant between me and that candidate, and it doesn't really matter who it is. So it is, people do know their business, and that's why when you specialize in a business, you'll find out who you very quickly. You just get burnt once or twice, and then you say, "Well, I'm not doing that again." So that is where most of the credit is. So most of the credit is
distributed credit agencies.
In
other words,
whereas in my business, I'm not particularly worried like exactly when clients pay me. I have had so few problems with clients not paying up. It might take a bit of time, but inevitably I get my money, and it's not a big deal. But I'm in a different business.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and I don't have that problem. I had to learn a few times. I had the problem, to the point it almost took me down. But you learn real quick, who you can extend credit to and who you can't.
So the last thing that I want to say on that, or at least because we've kind of like explored it, is the idea that for integrity there is no substitute, and that Bitcoin is inherently like it's meant to function in without integrity. Like my understanding of the white paper is that the Bitcoin white paper is that as long as like there's a known attack, which is the 51% attack, and that attack is basically, I think the way that Satoshi puts it is, as long as more than 51% of the nodes, as long as at least 51% of the nodes are honest nodes, then you should be safe. And the word honest, which
I mean, that's the white paper isn't even written correctly on that. For starters, nodes should never be called nodes. It should have been talking about hash power specifically. And honest isn't the right way to term it. It's not honesty. It's acting in self-interest in a particular way.
Well, I think maybe the only intrinsic value that Bitcoin may have, and I agree with Roger Ver that there is no intrinsic value, it's all imputed, but maybe it's not. When it comes to Bitcoin, it is ultimately integrity. It has its own integrity internally that doesn't depend on people.
That's right.
And so when we say for integrity there is no substitute, maybe Bitcoin is the first thing we've ever had that meets that qualification. Has
integrity on its own right outside of individuals.
I mean, I think that's kind of a philosophical question. Do you say that because after all, if you're really talking about inherent, well, obviously I could just go fork the code and then kind of make the same arguments about my fork. It still comes from the society around it. But, there's so many things like that. But I guess
like, you can't, it's almost impossible. I mean, so far, 10,000 of them have failed to create the decentralization and security of Bitcoin, even though they forked it 1,000 times, right?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say that's actually a really good argument that the inherent value of it does come from a social context. So the only real inherent value is that it can create the social context.
So you say it's a social context and not a technological one.
Yeah, because if it was truly technological, forks would be worth as much, but they're not. They just aren't.
Okay. Okay. I see.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, technology is a social thing. It's a human.
Gold does not have inherent value at all in proportion to its value. You know, there's plenty of other precious metals that these days were pretty good substitutes for gold, you know, arguably better in certain cases. You know, why aren't we using platinum as money? Well, because that's, you know, we don't use platinum as money. Simple as that.
Network effect.
Yeah. You know, and you see this very literally in the price swings. Like other precious metals swing more wildly in price than gold does because the use cases are smaller and there just isn't this huge pile of central bank reserves, you know, other reserves sitting on that metal. You know, I mean, silver is an interesting example actually, because by the time photography film ended, you know, stopped using silver on a huge scale, silver wasn't really monetarily relevant, so the price crashed.
Yep.
It's going back up.
Yep.
Yeah.
Outperforming gold for right now.
Yeah.
It was very surprising to me. So
that's interesting. Yeah, a lot of people were very negative on it. A variety of people, but it's nice that it went up. All right. So I mean, the last question that we should address, which is the title of the show, is secrets locked in time. So I saw a tweet.
Yes, the time lock thing.
The time lock thing. So somebody tweeted out to something that you implemented, and it's a form of time lock. And what it means is, as far as I understand, and help us understand it. So you can grab an arbitrary secret, for example, let's say an inheritance will. You can grab a will, and then encrypt it in such a way that it can only be decrypted a year from now, let's say, and that's done in a way that you don't have to give some private key to a third party to keep it safe, which is basically the case in every other implementation of it that I can conceive of until now. So
all right. So here's the fundamental mathematical concept that really matters, which is there are some mathematical problems which you can solve in parallel, and then some ones you have to go solve sequentially, right? And Bitcoin's proof of work is an example of a parallel problem, right? Because any guess, right, for the nonce that goes into a Bitcoin block hash, that is equally as likely as being correct as any other guess, right? So I can have an arbitrarily large number of people working on that in parallel at the same time. Now, if you have a key that's encrypted with, you know, in a way that depends on a parallel problem, well, obviously it could be decrypted a lot faster than you'd expect because people will go work on it in parallel. So the trick with my time lock scheme was to use sequential hashing, and that part of the trick isn't new. I should be clear. You know, the fact that sequential hashing can only be done in a sequence is well known, and there's limitations on how much faster you could possibly do sequential hashing. You know, and it really comes down like, how is a computer chip made, right? You know, it's a physical thing of a certain size, and there's only so many circuits we can go cram into it, right? And when you do a hash, you know, very literally, to be exact, electromagnetic waves have to travel around that circuit. And because we can't make it any smaller, there's a limit to how much faster an individual hash can be, right? And it's sort of like one hash might take, you know, 1 nanosecond, but we're never going to do better than, say, 100th of that, right? Because there's speed of light problems here. You know, those numbers are just picked up at the top of my head, right? But the point is, you can't scale that the way you can, you know, parallel
Isn't
problems.
that what ASICs are, though? Like, they just let you run hashes faster?
Yes, but not infinitely faster, right? Like, they'll let you can buy as many ASICs as you want, so you can do them in parallel. But any individual hash, even with an ASIC, just isn't that much faster than the best implementations you can buy commercially.
Okay, so there's a fundamental floor of like a minimum speed or time delay that it takes to create a
time
hash.
delay is a really critical thing, right?
Yeah.
It's not so much speed, there is a delay. I
Time
put
delay,
data into my hash function, and a little bit later data comes out, and that time between in and out, that's your time delay.
Okay.
And it's very, very short time delay. I mean, hash functions are very, very fast, but it is finite. So you just figure out, well, how long is that time delay? And you can extend it as far as you want, right? By repeating hashes over and over and over again. Because if the input If I have an input to a hash and then you get an output, I can't predict that output. So then if I feed it back into the input of the hash again, and chain it over and over again, I can't predict what's on the output. So the only way to compute that output is to go through it sequentially. Now that part was well known. The clever thing I did was I said, all right, that's all well and good. Now I want publicly verifiable info on how fast people can do these hashes. And I also want to provide an incentive to spend the computing power to do this in the fastest way possible. So what time lock does is it takes your secret and then it creates chains of hashes. And the idea is that each individual chain, if I start at the beginning and then compute to the end, I get a private key for some Bitcoin on the Bitcoin blockchain. That's my reward, or I should say that's anyone's reward for solving this hash chain. But the catch is, the moment I use my reward and spend it, I am revealing to the public how long it took to compute that hash chain. Right? And as the person with the secret, you want to know, well, what is the fastest someone can go hash these hash chains? Right? Because that lets you know, well, what's the soonest my secret could be revealed?
So this is a kind of test of the speed at which people can compute a hash chain.
Yes. Yeah, it's a way of leveraging Bitcoin to provide an incentive to both solve these hash chains and also reveal how fast they can be solved.
Find that time delay minimum.
Yeah, because the threat is, if you're depending on time lock encryption, is someone might be able to go and compute it faster than expected.
Right. So help me understand. Isn't there an asymmetry in the generation of the hash chain, that like you need to be able to generate the hash chain privately much faster than it needs to be publicly kind of computed, right?
Yeah.
How does that work?
And the asymmetry is that I effectively encrypt the beginning of each hash chain with the end of another. And that means that the person who sets up the hash chain can do it in parallel, but the public can only solve it in series.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. I think I get it. I think I'm getting it.
Yeah. And I've actually ran that software once publicly. Apparently there was a bit of use of it for some other use cases, but I at least did it publicly and published it on the Bitcoin Dev mailing list. Here's the beginnings of each chain. Here's how you run this. And sure enough, the fastest implementation, I think, was something like 50% faster than the implementation I had, which isn't really that much in the context of this stuff. It being a parallel problem, the fastest time to solve the parallel problem would probably be a factor of 1 million. Even for just a hobby thing, because people will get access to big clusters and all kinds of stuff. But
right.
Oh,
that's cool.
I want to address it. Danny Lynch says that he has not been getting notifications that we're live. So
I don't know. I'll have to look into that.
We are notifying on Twitter. We're notifying on email, and we're notifying on the Telegram.
Yeah, so. But I guess he's talking about. Are you talking about a YouTube notification, Danny? I think that's what he means. Like, make sure you hit that bell, subscribe, and hit the bell button. Put all notifications.
We're looking at that. We're trying to improve all the stuff that we're doing.
Yeah.
And one of the biggest improvements we have is we have Peter Todd on.
Definitely. So what are some of the what's the utility of this technology? What are maybe some examples of what it lets us do?
Well, I mean, one obvious one is essentially like backups for like multi-sig stuff, right? Because you can be in a position where you might want to be sure that something unlocks after a certain point in time. Now, on Bitcoin itself, you can of course do this with check lock time verify or check sequence verify. It essentially says at the Bitcoin protocol level, reveal, like, let this money be spent after a point in time. But in some cases, you don't really have these options because these features either don't exist or you want to do something in a bit more generic way. So if you want to, say, have a backup mechanism to certainly get access to funds in the future, this can be a way to do it. by encrypting keys that can only be revealed, after a certain time delay, which then lets people to essentially deal with break-ins or detect break-ins or things like that. So there's a bunch of applications there. Other examples, a particularly interesting one, which was really early on, and people may not realize this, but early on, I actually did work for I was like hired by Matthew Green for Zcash, and at the time they wanted to make sure that the Zcash, or at the time called ZeroCoin testnet, wouldn't be valuable. So I suggested we use time lock encryption to ensure that the secret key, like remember in Zcash, it's a trusted setup. So you can break the crypto by revealing a key that should be thrown away. Well, for the testnet, the idea was you'd keep the key, time lock encrypt it, so it would be guaranteed to be revealed at some point in the future, making, of course, the coins worthless because then you could go counterfeit them. And they had good reason to go want to do this because they didn't want their testnet to become an actual coin in itself.
So that was implemented.
Well, I wrote time lock around that time. I suggested it and said, all right, let's go do this. And they never actually did that in the end.
Okay.
But that was my original kind of proposal.
That became Zcash. I'm just kidding.
It was many years ago, and at the time that would have been for ZeroCoin, which was sort of the
ZeroCoin,
predecessor sort of concept. But it's leading up to Zcash. And you also get there was one other example, like in Zcash, they did the same thing again later during the second trusted setup ceremony, where what was again? So anyway, some part of the protocol they wanted to reveal in advance something, or commit something in advance that they'd that it would reveal in the future. I honestly forget the exact details of it, but again, it was like time lock encryption. Only in that case, being a simple one-off, they didn't bother using the time lock program. They just iterated a SHA-256 or something function, a billion times, and that was they just did that essentially with a quick script. But the concept was the same.
Interesting. Cool. I mean, I think one of the applications that I see on it would be something like a will, but I think maybe there's some sort of technology there. I just think it's really cool, like that you can grab a secret and then just lock it in time, and it's like if anybody's trying, they're not gonna be able to break it for a certain.
Time. So things like wills are an interesting example because if as an example, if you want to go put secret keys in them to then pass on Bitcoin private keys to your descendants, you have this really big security problem, which is you don't want people to be able to steal that actual document and then immediately spend the keys. You want to have some time period to detect that theft. Well, time lock is great for this because it means that starting from when someone steals that document, it's now going to take them, say 3 months to actually get the money. And that means your security only needs to go check on the physical security of that document before that time period could expire to then recover the coins, in case some thief gets them.
Yeah, I actually met a guy at a conference. This guy it's funny. He was basically a hippie, right? He's a fruitarian, very spiritual guy. And he apparently was in Tibet. And there's another guy that was in this Tibet sort of monastery of sorts or temple, right? And they were talking, and suddenly his friend came in and came to me. He's like, "Hey, have you heard of Bitcoin?" This is like way back, right?
Yeah.
He's like, "No, what is it?" "Well, it's just this magic internet money. Here, have this thing." And they gave him a wallet, a paper wallet.
Yeah.
And he's like, "Okay," so he put it away. And then 3-4 years later, eventually he's back in civilization or something. And his buddy calls him up. He's like, "Hey, did you check? Do you still have that paper I gave you?" It's like, "Yeah, actually I do." Guy was rich. Like entirely just rich.
Yeah.
So what they ended up doing was they I believe they implemented some sort of time lock contract for him where he would get basically a certain amount every month paid out over a long period of time.
Yeah.
So I guess they locked it in. I don't know exactly how they did it.
Yeah. Oh, you could do that with check lock time verify for sure.
Right.
But
But
the key thing about time lock encryption is it lets you do that in a way where the clock is guaranteed to start when the person actually like gets access to the physical thing. And that's, you can't easily replicate that with crypto for a lot of systems. I mean, as example, like if you want to encrypt your backups, right? Like suppose you want to go pass on data to your family. There is no alternative but time lock encryption for this use case.
And I get confused when you talk about time lock encryption. I confuse it with like on-chain time locks, the opcode, so to speak, right?
Yeah. So the time lock encryption is very different because it works at the level of data. The time locks on the Bitcoin opcodes, they can only work within the context of Bitcoin.
Right.
Yeah,
So
that's your key
like
difference.
The crypto itself, time lock crypto, as in not a
Yes.
Bitcoin opcode.
Yes. The actual hash chains magic.
Right. Actual cryptography.
And again, like the key difference there is that because it works at the actual level of the data, you can apply it to any problem. It doesn't have to be Bitcoin.
Yeah, it's you can any kind of data can go into it. Yep. That's very cool. So, and I believe this was in part pushed forward by Amir Taaki. So Amir Taaki is back in the game and he's doing some cryptography research. That was refreshing to see. I mean, he was kind of a legend back in the day.
Yeah. So I forget what the order this was, but I think like Amir Taaki and I, there's kind of So one was the proof of the pay to pub thing, which I think it was Amir Taaki implemented the pay to pub thing, and I think with time lock, Amir Taaki might have done some very trivial implementation of it, and I kind of finished off or something. Again, like this is many years ago, I'd have to go double check, but
because I saw this
think he was
article.
involved
We
in
have
some
it in
way.
the we have it in the about section. It goes to, maybe I'm thinking of the wrong person here. I thought it was Amir Taaki, but we have this article to gwern.net, self-decrypting files.
Yes. All right. Yeah. So that's where I first learned about the concept of time lock encryption.
And it's
actually
quite the document. I mean, incredible.
Yeah. No, it's quite a good one.
Very
it's
well
just
sourced.
So the key thing I did was I read through that document, like very literally where time lock came from. Is I read through that document and I thought, all right, I can use this hash chain thing, and I can add Bitcoin to it, and I can make it just incrementally better. That's my contribution.
Right.
The core principle of it is, was pre-existing work, but adding Bitcoin to it to provide this incentive and this measuring capability, that's the key thing I added.
That's interesting. Bitcoin as a clock, yeah.
Yeah.
It's a great document. People should have a look at it. It's in the description. It's basically a history of cryptography on its own.
Was that written? How old is that?
Yeah, I'm not sure.
It's quite a few years old now. Probably even 10 by now, I think.
Wow.
But it has been updated a bit. I mean, after all, it mentions time lock now.
Whose website is this? gwern.net.
Oh, I forget the guy's name, but he's kind of well known in the crypto space. For quite a few years, like one of these many sort of cypherpunks out there.
Right. I thought this was Amir Taaki's website, so I guess I'm wrong.
No, that's not.
Okay, good to know.
But Amir Taaki was involved in writing one of my ideas. I think the pay to publication idea, which works similarly to time lock in some ways.
Right. Okay. Yeah, it's 2011.
Yeah.
So
Updated.
It's being kept up to date. I mean, it's quite a website. Yeah. Definitely recommend it. I was very impressed with it. Well, that's all I have as far as questions and commentary. Do you have anything else you want to mention? Anything you wanna pump? You're still doing open timestamps?
Yeah, still doing that. Yeah, please go buy my open timestamps token. It'll go up in value at least like 1 times more than it's worth, which is 0. But yeah, it'll go from 0 to 0. You should buy them all.
Right?
Yeah. It's 100% return, 100% in, 100% out.
All right. Well, Peter, now that you're on the show, you're going to have to go through the ugly old goat routine, and I keep it real simple.
Right.
Because what I teach is we hodl, and the hodl that's our savings. That's what we do. And then I bastardize the word savvy, and we make that save. And as you hodl, you will enrich yourself. So you want to reward yourself. So every now and again, you want to save. And then the last thing we do as we build it. And everybody builds in their own way. It doesn't have to be on Bitcoin. You might have a car wash and you just want to have a good car wash. In my case, I started uglyoldgoat.com and this silly outfit and the silly dance. So, but before we leave, you have to make a complete fool of yourself with Juan.
With all of us.
All right. So you ready?
I'm ready.
This thing? Okay,
do
here we
this.
go. Hodl, hodl, hodl.
Save.
Oh,
Save.
Build a. Sound money. Sound money.
Thank you so much for coming on, man.
Thanks.
All right.
Thanks, man.
All right. Chat later.
Yeah, take care,
Bye.
man. And thanks everybody out there on the show. Make sure you share this link. Let us know what you think on the comments on Twitter and anywhere else you can find us. We're on all social media, even though we only got like 50 views. But that's all right.
Yeah.
On
All
to the
right.
future.
Well,
All right. See you next time.
I think we're getting more.
Bye.
on
Yeah, we're getting
Twitter.
more on Twitter. We got a bunch on Twitter.
All right.